The primary purpose of Innovative AAC Solutions, the podcast, is to educate and inform. The views expressed during all episodes are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute educational or medical advice. They are not necessarily the views of Special School District of St. Louis County.
Welcome back to our season finale of Innovative AAC Solutions. I'm Bridget Solberg.
I'm Laura Hayes.
And we're so excited to have you guys for the season finale. We get to sit down and interview Ereeni Roulakis. But before we do that, I'm interested, Laura, in especially this time of year. It's spring, it's nice outside, it's fun, but also we're going to be kind of thinking about that transition into summer and kids being at home a lot. Do you have any tips regarding GLPs and supporting them with literacy, which is just such a transferable activity?
So, similar to some of the other areas of Gestalt language processing, we don't have a lot of formalized research in this yet, but we have formalized research that we can look to for guidance in general to support any AAC user and anyone with complex communication. So, I know you guys are going to dive into some more discussion on with Ereeni on research and relevant topics and things and how we can apply that. So I really think when it comes to literacy, using what we know from other forms of research, Erickson and Copenhaver, like they are the gurus. They are the ones that we look to when it comes to research for anyone with complex communication. And so I
And
really
if you haven't read Complex Literacy for All, here's a plug.
So that was going to be my suggestion. I think we can throw in the show notes a few resources. Jane Farrell has a really great website that is organized beautifully for comprehensive literacy with lots of reference to the research that they have done. David and uh, Dr. Erickson have done such amazing work in this field, and they have really taken it and tried to make it as functional and applicable as possible. So Jane has a great website. The resources behind anything that, like Monarch Reader and anything that they do with Dr. Erickson's crew, is fantastic and well sounded in what research is available. And then we actually, SSD has a comprehensive literacy website with a ton, again, jam-packed with resources that are evidence-based that you can go to, that has things like shared reading and what independent reading can look like, the benefits of thinking through personalized interests and customized stories, and why that can be important, the benefits of repetitive lines in stories, and thinking about how we can clinically apply that to someone who is a GLP. We know there's some correlation to hyperlexia and autism and Gestalt language processing. So thinking through that lens of how we can support them with these resources, we'll throw them in the show notes for sure, because there's so many different ways to look through that lens and support our GLPs with literacy. But you talked with Ereeni in way more detail about other research, right?
Yeah, I did. So I had the pleasure of sitting down with Ereeni, and she's a speech language pathologist based out of New Orleans. She specializes in early language, AAC, and she's trained with Gestalt language processing and natural language acquisition. And it was just such a great interview. So let's dive on in. I'm here today with Ereeni Roulakis, and welcome to our podcast. Ereeni, do you want to just kind of give a basic introduction about your path and the background in regards to GLP and AAC?
Yes. Hi. First, good morning, and thank you, Bridget, for having me on this podcast, talk about augmentative and alternative communication and Gestalt language processing. I've been working with children since 2011. I started out working in social emotional programs here in New Orleans. I worked at a children's museum, delivering like social skills for general education classrooms post Katrina. And then after that experience, I decided to go back to school for more education and training. And somebody, a dear friend of mine, suggested that I look into speech language pathology. And he also suggested that I look into the work of Marge Blanc and her work of the natural language acquisition framework. And this would have been in 2016. And so I did look into her work. I was familiar with delayed echolalia as being communicative because of the book and documentary Life Illustrated. And it really, which maybe I'm forgetting the name of it now, and I apologize if I got the name of it wrong, but that's how I started my journey into learning about Gestalt language processing. I went back to grad school, became a speech language pathologist, met my first Gestalt language processor, a young student who wasn't so young. She was in the third grade in 2018. And I applied the natural language acquisition framework using those supports that Marge Blanc had outlined, as well as the stages of natural language acquisition to document and understand the student's language development and the trajectory that she was taking of taking these long chunks and breaking them up until she got to single words and then started putting them together. Fast forward a bit, after I graduated from university, I quickly realized that a lot of my Gestalt language processors, a lot of my autistic students needed more communication support, alternative and augmentative communication. And so I started learning about that, and that trajectory has led me to this moment here. I've cut out a lot, but wanted to do that brief overview.
Yeah, it is always like that pivotal moment where you think back to that client that you actually see how natural language acquisition works, and you see like, oh, we're unlocking language in a child, and it can just feel so powerful and wonderful when you have that success. That's really wonderful to hear. And how would you say that the field of both education and speech language pathology has evolved in regards to supporting Gestalt language processing and the use of AAC?
I would say that, fortunately, unfortunately, I think that students, children, individuals, what they say and what they are expressing and communicating, whether it's rewinding on a YouTube video or saying something with their mouths, I think is now taken more seriously and it's now listened to more. It's unfortunate because we have for a long time had the research as well as the voices of parents, autistic individuals, clinicians, professionals saying that delayed echolalia and gestalts communicate. But I think that what has been a shift is not only does this communicate, but it also is part of a developmental trajectory. And it's part of human development, it's part of child development. And I think that gives educators but I would say more so speech language pathologists, because of our role in child development and language development, us just taking it more seriously and thinking about it and evaluating it, writing it down, documenting it into our language samples, as well as for educators that are supporting students in classrooms of being more assured that what their student is doing is natural, is important, and is something to be supported.
Yeah,
So
and something I notice is when I'm talking with parents, especially when I bring up that it is natural part of development, that it's almost like they can breathe a sigh of relief and hear like, yes, she's affirming that my child is, moving through language in a natural way, and we're not having to kind of have that moment with each other of like, is this working? Is this not working? Because we're both on the same page with this. So I definitely see a shift in professionals and parents who feel affirmed in that. What would you say some of the research says about Gestalt language processing and AAC. I know that you had an opportunity to kind of dive into that.
Yes, so when I was in grad school, I did an independent study on Gestalt language processing, and I had a full syllabus of diving into the research. We have a lot of research. It maybe isn't under the name of Gestalt language processing. Sometimes it is. But we have a lot of research that first says that we know and we have known that all kids acquire their first units. So typically we think of a first unit as a first word. But when we think of a first unit of language, a first unit of meaning, sometimes it's a word like ba for bottle. Other times it can be a chunk, like it's time to go to bed. And all children, or clap your hands, all children acquire units of different sizes. Sometimes it's a single word, sometimes it's multi-unit words. There's some children that take very specific routes that maybe will only acquire single words, or maybe that only really start out by acquiring these chunks of language. And there can be lots of reasons for that. It could be neurological reasons where maybe just a single word is just too short of a sound. And you're really wanting a long intonational chunk, and that's for, various reasons. Maybe that's what you're first starting out with. So we have this documented in so many different places. It's very common knowledge among linguists. We also have research that young children will take these multi-word utterances and then use those words to break them up, what we call, in using the natural language acquisition framework, what we call mitigating. So breaking up those chunks. There's lots of research that neurotypical children do this. And there's lots of research methods, specifically the trace back method, where you correlate, these chunks that they have, and then to the novel utterances. Sorry, I'm getting into real
No,
linguistics
let's
here.
get into the weeds. Let's do it.
Oh, that's really great to hear. That this is their source material, that these chunks of language are what they start out with, and then will use as their source material, as what they will use to make new utterances.
Yeah.
And
So, like, what we're kind of hearing as, clinicians and educators in the field, that would be like stage 2. So, they would acquire the whole units in stage 1, breaking it down, and they're using that, what you're calling source material, to mitigate, mix, and match in stage 2. Is that correct?
Yes. And the research that we have on this is typically for very young children. We're talking 2 years old, 3 years old. But with autistic individuals that maybe will be doing this process into older ages of life for various reasons, what they offer us is actual memories of doing this. And I have this quote from Amethyst Schraber, an autistic advocate on YouTube. They have a channel called Ask an Autistic. She has this, or they have this quote here saying, "I would speak using phrases and quotations from Disney movies and eventually graduating into longer and longer scripts. I started to piece together what I heard, and through this cutting and pasting, I graduated into speaking what neurotypical people like to call using my own words."
Oh, I
And I love,
love that. Doesn't that just like hitch in the feels where you're like, yeah, that's what language is, right?
yes, exactly. And Um, we have, it's in the research that neurotypical young children also do this. It's a natural process. Um, yes. And so, moving from that, we know that all children do this. And the question is, to what degree? We, as clinicians and professionals, are reporting that we see that oftentimes autistic children that we have identified as taking a Gestalt language trajectory, what Dr. Barry Prezant called a very he called it from the spectrum or the continuum, that, maybe they would take a solely Gestalt route where they are primarily and maybe even solely using these long utterances, these long chunks, to start with language. And so we have research that autistic children do this too, starting back into the 70s of documenting autistic children using, what was called back then delayed echolalia, taking those utterances and cutting and pasting them together.
It's so interesting that it seems like, the pendulum has swung and it's like we forgot. It's like we had collective amnesia that this didn't exist for a moment in time, and here we are rediscovering this research and feeling energized by it and saying, we are able to help kids move through language more to that self-generative stage, whether they're using OGCOM or whether they're verbally speaking. But isn't it just so refreshing to know that we're grounded in some good research, and of course we have more research to uncover, and I think that it's so awesome that you did that case study. Do you want to share a little tiny bit about your case study in grad school?
Yes, so I did an independent study. I had a student that I don't know if I would, it wasn't so formal as a case study, but
Okay.
it was just a student that I was working with during my internship. And she more or less followed the same pattern of taking these large chunks of language and then mixing and matching them. And I agree, it is very refreshing. And there's a lot of pushback around this right now. And I think it's very unfortunate because I think there's so much variation in how early development looks like. And as speech language pathologists, it's important. We care. We care what kids say. We care how they develop. Um, and I've seen some speech therapists try to dismiss what we're trying to uncover and understand as, well, we've always known that kids do that, so what? And it's just so surprising to me to kind of hear this dismissal of so what when, really as speech language pathologists, as professionals, I mean, I think we would at least be able to agree upon that how a child develops, how an individual develops, their language is important and deserves to be thought about and looked at.
Well, and also I've had students who've gotten really stuck in stages, and to see kind of that arrested development where they're, in stage one for a long, long, long time. I'm talking 16-year-olds, and that they're distressed because people can't understand them. It's like if we can have this collective shift to, okay, if we know a path forward and we can all support this child, how much, in 1 year as a 16-year-old, if we're all on the same page of like, what can we do to collectively strategize to help him advance and be, the best advocate for this child in this year together, that their progress can sometimes really bloom in a short amount of time, which is really amazing to see. Um, how would you say educators can use authentic assessment, progress monitoring, and clinical and educational approaches to help these students who are Gestalt language processors, no matter what their age, no matter what their stage, and especially the ones who are using OGCOM in the classroom?
Yes. I think talking about our older students, I think it's a really, like you said, sometimes it does take just a partner that's willing to listen, to, well, first be recognized as a communicator, as someone communicating and deserving to be listened to. I've also seen where sometimes having a partner or having someone that knows how to support that sort of language and that sort of style of interaction where maybe somebody is using a movie quote to communicate something that may or may not be related to what the movie quote is referencing. Um, like I said, this is part of natural language development, and I have seen where some kids start to go through go through the stages and continue their language development. I have also seen where kids are in that stage because, they're 16 years old and their trajectory has been that they will probably remain primarily in those stages for the majority of their lives. That being said, it's really something like I would call a Pandora's box to kind of get into. Like I have one student who primarily spoke in stage 1 scripts because they were often just so dysregulated, and a lot of their day was really just spent trying to regulate themselves. But in a quiet room, using a wordless picture book, they were able to narrate a story using up to stage 5 grammar. Or if something really interested them, a special interest, they would start to really use that grammar. But if you were to take a language sample, it would be 98%, stage 1, and then 2%, stage 4, stage 5.
Yeah, that's a good point of like a kid can be in stage 1 and then have those pop out areas where they're in other stages. And that can also happen, verbally, they're in stage 3 on OGCOM. Sometimes they're in stage 1 or stage 2, right? Just kind of seeing those subtle discrepancies and
Yes.
knowing that, our students have a multitude within them, and it kind of depends on how they're supported, and also, like you said, interest level, right?
Yes, and remembering that, talking about the stages is just an assessment tool, and it has its limitations. Like if I was to take a language sample of myself in the evenings, like I have pretty short utterances because I'm pretty tired. But this interview right now, I have really, really long utterances. So it really, the stages is an assessment tool. It really only gives you one, it may not really give you much information, because if I was to tell someone, oh, I had a student at the age of 3rd grade that I started working with, and then within a year they were at stage 5, but I left out the information that, it was only under very specific conditions when they were extremely well regulated were they able to access, self-generated grammar, that would paint a different picture, than what someone is maybe thinking about. So in terms of progress monitoring and assessment tools and that sort of thing, I think it really needs to be in a wide kind of context and thinking about what are you really wanting to know. Are you wanting to know that a child or a student would be able to tell a story about their day, or maybe something about their life? Like recently here in Louisiana, we had a record snowstorm. We had almost a foot of snow, where I've only, in my 18 years of living here, I've seen just a couple snow flurries here and there. So, I've been asking my students, showing them pictures of snow and seeing if they can tell me about it. And to, maybe somebody would be able to quote, some a story about snow from Disney or YouTube, or are they able to put things together? That sort of thing. I think that we need to be thinking about, especially for our Gestalt language processors that use OGCOM, communication needs to be embedded in every activity. Like when I talk about literacy for Gestalt and AAC users that are Gestalt language processors, sometimes I'll get asked about, probably the most common thing that I get asked about is phonics, which is not my area of expertise, so I usually can't really answer. But typically when I talk about literacy, I'm talking about the ability to read a book together and be able to make comments. I'm talking about journal writing and the ability to tell someone about your life. Things that are focused on expressive communication. And that's really the emphasis of natural language acquisition framework, is really a big emphasis on expressive communication. And then, that works both ways in supporting a person's ability to comprehend as well.
And I will say, for anybody listening who has access to special school district, our literacy for complex learners is a wonderful 2-day workshop that is offered in both the fall and spring semesters that goes into this as well. And I cannot recommend that workshop enough. Because once you can, as a teacher, as an SLP, feel confident about engaging your students with literacy, sometimes their little worlds open up. Like you said, showing them pictures of snow or reading a book about snow helps them make those connections, and you're pouring more language in, giving them more gestalts, and they become more expressive. They're able to make comments and, ask questions, which is just what we want to see as educators, right?
Yes. And I will say, especially for, typically when we're talking about Gestalt language processors, oftentimes the ones that are on our caseloads, more often than not, especially if they're older, they are autistic. I would say that for a lot of my students, literacy is mostly through journal writing and talking about pictures of themselves. I've had some students where they'll just reject any sort of book, or maybe I'll be reading a book as they're pacing back and forth, and they'll flick their eyes just for a quick moment, something that maybe caught their interest. Um, and that will be, just a quick sideways glance is all that I'm seeing in terms of engagement with literacy. So I really want to emphasize that, yes, I emphasize literacy, and it really looks as diverse as our students are.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be that conventional. You're sitting here, I'm sitting next to you. We're turning the pages together. It doesn't need to be that prescriptive, right?
I would say that maybe about 2% of
Yeah.
my engagement does it look as,
Well, and I've had students who, when they came to me in kindergarten, it looked one way. And when they left in fifth grade, it looked totally different. So it's, an evolution, right?
It's an evolution, but it, often is going in circles. Like I have some students that maybe start out by being able to sit and listen
Right.
to a book, and by fifth grade, they're like,
No, thank you. Yeah.
no, thank you. And it might be developmental, or it just might be a change in interests. And
And like what you said before, so often I see regulation status driving um, a lot of the responses of my autistic students. So, a one luxury we have working in the schools is you can tap into your occupational therapist and hopefully try to incorporate whatever sensory supports your OT has recommended. And if you can connect on those points and try to regulate your students as much as possible during your speech therapy sessions, in the middle of the classroom, however you can do it, often that yields the best results. But then also just like letting language happen as it's happening and not being so prescriptive in things, right?
yes, yes. An example I have of that would be one student that I work with, minimally unintelligibly speaking. I can understand none of their gestalts or none of what they're saying, but his mother and I are pretty sure that he's saying or singing something he's heard. I've been working with him for about 6 months, and finally we're able to understand that he was singing the Days of the Week song. But I read him a story the other day on a blue swing as he was swinging back and forth, and I had picture cards, and I would read the picture card with the picture and the words on the back, and then hand it to him as he was swinging, and then he would take it and then let it drop to the ground. And that was our engagement with literacy, where he was regulated on a swing. We're working on a handing gesture. I was modeling on AAC, single words, as well as 3, 2, 1, blast off, because it was a rocket, which he's seeing a story about outer space, which he seemed to enjoy. And by he seemed to enjoy, meaning again, just there was a very brief glance at the rocket. And so, when I talk about literacy, that those are the kinds of situations that I'm talking about. Oftentimes I find that professionals and parents sometimes are like, well, you talk about literacy, but are you talking about literacy for my student? And the answer is yes, I
Yes.
am absolutely talking about literacy for your student.
Yeah. All means all, right?
It's all, and I have seen,
Yeah.
please rest assured, just like you and so many others, we have seen it all.
Yeah.
And we're still saying yes to literacy.
Yes. So, what are some other opportunities for growth and learning if a listener wants to learn more about this topic?
So I would really recommend to friends, colleagues, partners, um, dear friend Jen Kronk, who created the blog N of One. If you really want to see AAC, Gestalt, and literacy in action, I can't recommend her blog and YouTube videos. I guess they're vlogs because they're
Yeah.
mostly YouTube
And
videos.
Jen was just on this season. So if you haven't checked out the episode with Laura where she interviews Jen, check it out too. But her vlog is wonderful, shows it in action.
It shows it in action and it's real life. Yes, can't recommend it enough. Also my dear friend Shubha Bala, North Star and the Compass, their blog as well, which is now there's a Substack. They also created a resource called A Year in the Life of an AAC User. And that shows their young child and their progression of using AAC, that and all the different ways that they would use it as a Gestalt language processor, taking a very unique and language trajectory that is very much their own. And I really think that people need to be paying attention as we think about the future for Gestalt language processing and AAC users, that we really need to be thinking about how it's being used by the users. They're ultimately, what guides us. And so, with that, I would say that if you want to learn more, get to know your students, get to know your individuals, and start modeling and paying attention and seeing what resonates for them, and get to know how they show you what resonates for them. Is it a really quick side glance? Is it a reaching gesture? And I'm talking about non-speakers, but also speakers alike, where paying attention to their nonverbal body language, which Jen Kronk also talks a lot
Yeah.
about, is
Cue in
really,
and attune to our students, right?
yes, yes. And when I take data, that's often what I'm taking data on, is how did they react to what I offered them? That's usually the best way that I know that that I'm making an impact and progress versus some kind of output or expressive indication. I mean, I do get those too, and those are wonderful moments, but typically it's really just me trying to pay attention to them.
Well, and those expressive moments are a snapshot in time, like we talked about before, whereas the more I would say the bigger bucket that you can pull from would be you attuning to them and then you noticing conventional or unconventionally how they are responding, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Ereeni, I'm curious, what is your favorite story or AAC moment with an AAC user? And this can be related to GLPs or just in general.
Um, there's so many. I wanted to share one. I'm going to share two stories because I want to share one about a student that was able to say this, one with their mouth, and then one that had to really rely on AAC and YouTube. Um, One student had some sort of gestalt from doing a puzzle, something about a magic box, and I showed him the words for magic box on his AAC, and we had my device and his device, and he set it up so that he would press magic on my device and box on his device so that he could really see and hear how they were separate. That magic box was magic box. Um, I know that Lamp really likes to talk about how kids are able to pull single words out from the sound stream with Lamp. But really for this kid, he
He needed
needed
two devices.
he needed
Yeah.
two devices.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then my other story that I have is, I've had a few students where just programming their gestalts, I have one student, no, homework, more freedom. Uh, was really his way to let us know that he was really over at work and
I hear
doing.
ya.
And I love this story. I have another student who also we programmed not again into his device. That's from Rio, and he would use it to whenever we pull up work, he would press not again, and it made the whole class laugh, and
That
it
is
really
authentic communication.
it's authentic communication, and it really changed the culture of the classroom because it just was so funny and just was so cute.
Yeah.
And really let us see the student's personality, and it changed the whole classroom. And so I really, yeah, when we just embrace authentic communication, it can change the whole world.
I love to hear it. Thank you so much for coming on, Ereeni. Do you have any ways that people can get in touch with you if they wanted to learn more from you?
Yes, I have a website. I also have an email. You can also find me on the Natural Language Acquisition Facebook group, where I do moderating for that group through March Blanc and the Communication Development Center. Um, Maybe, I don't know if there's going to be resources that we can put
Yeah,
along
we
with this.
can link in the transcript. Yep.
Uh, and that's how I can be contacted.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your insight. And that's another episode for Innovative AAC Solutions.
Thank you so much.
Back with another activity, and this one should sound familiar if you followed the podcast for a while. This is one of my favorites, and it's coming back because I want to talk to you about how I would use this for a GLP AAC user. It's tactile liquid letters. Love tactile liquid letters. I love looking at tactile anything for someone that might be a little more sensory interested. And these are so fun because I don't know if you can see, but there's a gel in here. So when I smush them, I'm getting input and the gel is moving all around. They're all different colors and they're all 26 letters of the alphabet. They're easily cleaned though, so I can kind of manipulate them any which way that I want. I can even chill them, so we can talk about temperature as well. So how would I use this for a GLP? Well, it depends on which language stage that they are in. For someone in stage 1, and again, how are we going to determine what language stage they're in? Okay, you all answered me and said we're going to take language samples and figure that out. So yes, so we're taking language samples. For a stage 1 GLP AAC user, we are going to look at modeling potential gestalts. So things like, it's squishy. Let me see. Ooh, it's moving. It's cold if we've chilled it a little bit. We're dipping, or maybe you can toss these into things, right? We're throwing, or we're not throwing if you don't want them to be doing that. But we can, it's bumpy. I don't like it. We can do all kinds of things around just the sensory play that we're doing with these letters. Once we're into stage 2, we're going to start mixing and matching those. So it's smooth, it's bumpy, it's a red one, it's a D, it's a blue one. Let's make letter soup. If I'm throwing it into a soup and mixing them up, let's mix it. These are just really great. I really like these for maybe some of my hyperlexic GLP AAC users, or again, someone who just really likes sensory play with their hands. I find them really fun to play with. So we can put them in foam and we can just kind of make pictures, do some writing, do some silly play with how they go together. And then, so that would be stage 2. We're just mixing and matching, right? So I like it. I like the feel. Gotta get more. We're mixing. We're taking them out. Then in stage 3, that's when we can really dive into the letters themselves. So it's or just U or pink U, big U, green N. It kind of looks yellow on the screen. Squishy N, that kind of thing. And then beyond, right? So lots of versatility, lots of opportunities with tactile liquid letters. They're a Lakeshore product, but they're in the IRC. We've got a few copies as of today. Definitely check it out. It's a really good group one too. So have this in your inventory and let us know how you like it and how your GLP AAC users do with this activity.